participation to fight COVID, including by donor nations in their own countries, but also elsewhere in the world, would basically triple what we still have to do. And we may want to come back to that before we close, but I'll move to Bono because he's been very active in supporting the attempt to replenish the funding of the Global Fund on AIDS, TB, and malaria. And it's really important. I mean, we've actually lost some ground in the AIDS fight in the last couple of years because we had to deal with other things. But there are some gaps we have to now fill in the TB effort. There are all these things that are out there. So, Bono, what's your take on this? How are we doing in maintaining support for the Global Fund and the fight against HIV? And do you think we're going to manage it? It looked to me like we got a global epidemic and then an epidemic of intense nationalism in our politics, and the two things didn't work very well together, and we're still paying for it a little bit.
Well, might I say, storytelling plays its role. Our politics is often hostage to our storytelling, and might I say how great it is to have a great storyteller back in that seat, our explainer in chief here. Top line melody man, if a singer can say that to a saxophone player. But you know, our ability to tell the story is critical, and the Global Fund is a success story. It's kind of the best kept secret in some sense. So that's where Red comes in, and the One campaign comes in. We need campaigners. We also need to reach out to companies, and I need to do better as a storyteller. I arrived here, I might tell you, in a Jeep Compass made by Chrysler, made by AIDS activists, and part of the Red campaign. If you work in Chrysler, if you work in Stellantis, you're an AIDS activist. And I have, you know, my red phone. This is, you know, Apple, or like, if you work at Apple, you're an AIDS activist. And if you buy, you know, through Bank of America, either of those products. In fact, even if you don't buy either of those products, you're still an AIDS activist. Because Bank of America are part of this story. And I would go further and say this. You, sir, were part of the negotiating of the prices of antiretroviral drugs down to a place where the rural poor could afford them. The United States, you led on this. President Bush spent $18 billion. President Obama continued, which, you know, presidents don't often do. If they don't start something, follow through. I think it's like, I think we used 52 million. On the way to 110 million. It's the largest health intervention in the history of medicine to fight a single disease, led by the United States of America. So if you're an American, you're an AIDS activist. And I love saying it. But how do we continue? There's also something about the moment we're in, and you mentioned nationalism and populism, and you mentioned, you know, the geometry of the conversation between rich and poor worlds has changed by the coronavirus, by the climate crisis, and by nationalism. And I think it's clear now that the old relationships that we used to call donor and recipient, it's over. It's over, and I'm glad they're over. And we are now clearly mutually dependent on each other. And so I think there's a new mood around the Clinton Global Initiative that I'm picking up. A new mood as we go into the global fund negotiations and the replenishment conference. But we must not take it for granted. And we need everyone coming through. We're hearing, you know, President Macron did an amazing job 3 years ago. 6 years ago, Prime Minister Trudeau did an incredible job. And it's literally the last 24 hours on the phones, making those deals. President Biden has got $6 billion on the table tomorrow, if the rest of the world matches it. And, you know, we're on our tenterhooks. The UK, you know, are not pledging this week. We hear because they're in mourning, and we're sad with them, and that they are in mourning. And you know, the Irish have a complicated relationship with royalty. I will say, yes, that, you know, what we know of Queen Elizabeth II is that if she had an appointment to keep, she kept it. And we will miss that. And I'm sure that the values that she espoused and epitomized, we will need them tomorrow. And we will need our friends in the UK to be with us tomorrow. And our hearts go out to them, and their checkbooks must come out to us.
When you said that about the Queen, I was thinking about how she gamely shook hands with Martin McGuinness.
That's the thing that people forget. And this is one of the only disagreements that we had with the president, and my personal disagreements, not a country one, but the president wanted to know how would it be if he was to speak to Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams, and he was asking his friends, just privately in Ireland, you know, what would that be, to get them visas. It was a very big risk. It would upset, actually, the British. And I said I wouldn't give them the visa. I felt it. I just felt it very. I didn't know that they were so serious for peace, and you did, and you were right, and our country was very grateful.
Dr. Mega, you know, I had more than a passing interest in your lifelong passion to sequence the human genome and make it all public, but I think that I spent $3 billion of American tax money to finish it. We thought we finished more than we had, and then she and her remarkable team proved that we had left a lot of things out. So, from a layman's point of view, can you briefly explain what it was you added to complete the sequencing of the genome? And then, can you say what it means for all these things we're talking about? Why is it, what are the implications for this for lengthening life, democratizing the reach of healthcare? Where are we going with all this? When all of us poor people who aren't as smart as you are have to figure out what to do with what you found out, how do we make the most of it?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to really emphasize that the Human Genome Project was a landmark achievement. And it has been a sea-level change. It has just been foundational for new scientific discoveries, for technology and innovation, and has really launched an era of new genomic medicine. With that being said, when we think about human genomes, we think about the instructions for cells, the instructions for life. People have thought about this as being the book of life. And what I want to express to everyone in the room on behalf of our team is that that book was missing a chapter. About 8%, 200 million bases, were missing for about 2 decades. And important information was in that final chapter. Information that can tell us more about our human histories, information that can help improve human healthcare, and information that tells us how the cell works at a very fundamental level. Now, when you ask me what sequences were in that 8%, I'll tell you that they were called repeats. So if you take my book metaphor, you can look at the sentences in that book and imagine that they're copied over and over and over again. In some cases, whole paragraphs are copied over again. And this was the critical and complexity and barrier that our team met. Now I want to go ahead and really talk to the theme of this meeting so far. I want to talk about the how. How did we do this, and why couldn't this happen before? Well, I want to go ahead and say, it's been an exciting era since the release of the Human Genome Project. We have seen growth in technology and innovation like we've never seen before. The Human Genome Project, as you rightfully said, was 20 research groups, multiple billions of dollars of investment, and it took over a decade. Now, there are studies that demonstrate that you can sequence a human genome in about 5 hours. What I'm showing you is a fun one, but it's a handheld device where we can now sequence 420 bases a second. I can plug this into my laptop, and it costs about $1,000. This type of technology, a lot of it was pioneered at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I'm based, is really important because not only can we generate sequences, but they're long sequences. Before, we were looking at about 100 ATCGs, 1,000 ATCGs. Now we're looking at routinely seeing hundreds of thousands of these stretches of DNA. And that is critical information for you to know, because it's the technology of today that allowed our team, this international group of researchers, to come together and apply methods to actually complete a human genome.
And explain to the audience here how this can be a benefit to people all over the world, even in the poorest places. Because we don't want this to be just one more thing that where rich people have a corner on healthcare. And I know it's not, but you explain to them how this is done.
Right, so if I can go ahead and jump a little bit, I think that the Human Genome Project had deficiencies in the fact that we need more than just one genome, and we need more than one genome that's of European ancestry. And so it's a really exciting time right now because I'm actually helping to direct the Human Pan-Genome Project, where we're trying to reach hundreds of these human genome projects that represent diversity around the world, and we're trying to use technology of today to build a resource that serves humanity tomorrow. And so the passion here is not only building a map that kind of can serve humanity better, but also challenging this audience to think about how researchers around this world can read genomes, can utilize genomes, and can begin to enter into the world in not an imbalanced way, but in a balanced way, to make use of precision genomics going forward. I would argue that reading the genome, this shared language that we all have, that we have a really hard time communicating around the world, just because of funding imbalance. And I think that the technology is there now. It needs to not be considered a U.S. technology or a particular schools technology. It needs to be global technology. Everyone should have access to this. And I also feel strongly that access to genomic information, as well as the promise of genomic medicine, should be viewed as a fundamental human right. And we have a moment right now to kind of step up and bring this forward. We see sequencing projects are happening all around us. We also know when we're celebrating COVID being brought on the scene that we can organize a global community. We can mobilize and start to sequence. And we can prepare, as I think another theme of this meeting, a new, younger workforce that has the skills necessary to bring it to the local communities. But it really will take a moment now of folks acting collectively to make this happen. Otherwise, this imbalance, this challenge with inequity in healthcare will be persistent for decades to come.
I'm going to resist the temptation to say what I was thinking. I always think about what are we supposed to learn from science about ourselves and how society should be organized. And basically, most of these studies show that we're about 99.5% the same. Every non-age-related difference you can see here is larger than 20% of our genome. And we all spend 99.5% of our time thinking about the 0.5% that's different. Not just the uber nationalists, everybody. If I could sing like Bono, I'd go on a different line of work. And that sort of stuff. And it should be humbling to us, as well as incredibly empowering, that these mysteries are being unlocked. And we all should become dedicated to an inclusive approach to biomedical research and its benefits being properly distributed. Dr. Tedros, you've been at this WHO job a good while now. If you could do 3 things tomorrow that would be your lasting legacy and you were a total dictator of health outcomes, what would you do what 3 things would you do to try to make the world's health better?
That's a tough one. I think I would do something practical, by the way. I would suggest this pandemic has been unprecedented, and the whole world has been really sick and tired. But at the same time, the most important thing is, have we really learned our lessons? That's very crucial. And if we have learned our lessons from the mistakes that we have made, because the whole world was unprepared when this pandemic hit, then we implement the lessons that we have learned in order to prevent the next one. So one priority, which we call generational agreement, is to have a pandemic accord or compact or agreement that really will make the whole world, for all countries, to have obligation to do something to prepare now before the next pandemic hits, and if the next one comes, to early detect and manage it as early as possible. So, I mean, to all the audience, maybe one request I have is exactly that. There is already negotiation now between member states, and we need to have a pandemic accord, agreement, or whatever we call it, compact, a legally binding agreement, to really address the challenge that we have faced. It could be equity, it could be sharing of information, it could be other things that we have already learned. That's one. The second is, I think everybody now understands the centrality of health. When health failed because of COVID, our economy was affected. Many countries faced political upheaval, and it had impact socially. It affected almost everything, and it took us hostage. So this, I mean, the best lesson here is to understand that health is central, and it's not a cost, it's an investment, and it's a fundamental human right, an end in itself, but at the same time, a means to development. So each and every country has to invest in health, and really honestly. And that's what I would like to see, and especially focus on primary health care, which we have done together. Primary health care is important to promote health, to prevent disease, but at the same time, primary health care is important for emergency preparedness and response. And in this pandemic, we have seen that even the most developed countries have lots of surprises, and so for themselves that they were not prepared because there was really low investment in primary health care. So that's the second. Investment in health, focus on primary health care. So these are the 2 issues, but one last thing I would like to say is focusing on promotion of health is very important. Living a healthy lifestyle. Managing disease is not the answer. It's promotion and prevention. And all we do, whether it's primary health care or so other things in the gym, is to keep healthy and that promotes health and prevents disease. So maybe these are the 2, among other things, but I would like to use this opportunity to also support the replenishment of the Global Fund. The Global Fund has contributed a lot since its existence, and I hope donors will fulfill their obligations by replenishing the 18 billion requested by the group. Thank you.
What do you think? What do you think will likely be the most life-changing benefit of the sequencing of the genome when all that comes out?
I think my enthusiasm is not on one silver bullet or one, amazing breakthrough. It's about a fundamental shift that I hope that we'll have in the future to create more equitable genomic resources and sharing, period. I think that will cause a ripple through all of the countries around the world where we'll start to make, once again, these massive scientific discoveries in many different directions instead of just aiming at one. And I do recognize that there was an international human genome project, however, there was an imbalance. The countries that could participate could afford to participate, and that imbalance is still present. And so I would hope my vision of the future is that we can start working toward diminishing that barrier and diminishing that imbalance and creating a structure to where we can begin to partner outside of the United States, not for just accepting materials and not for just going one direction, but actually building capacity, building infrastructure, beginning to train and expand genomic tools and technologies so that they are very much in position to take advantage of the new era where we can benefit from genomic resources as everyone else. We've already seen this working and being useful for AIDS. We've seen this being useful for studying COVID and various diseases. And I think by having this type of infrastructure and support, which we lack now, could be a new legacy for the future of our children to come.
If you had a different life, Bono might have been the world's first Secretary of State to represent us to other planets. He actually convinced Jesse Helms, who was the very right-wing chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that we ought to forgive the debts of the poorest country in the world. And my Treasury Secretary at the time, Roy Summers, was not a cultural cutting-edge guy. And he said, some guy in jeans, a white T-shirt, and sunglasses came to see me. And I'm like, oh no. He said, I never met anybody like him before, but he's smart as hell. So if you could do one thing today, what would you do? You get to wrap up. You get the last word.
I have to say, I told something, it's the end of the day, I might be allowed, people know I don't have a drink, but I was talking to Dr. Mika about, I was at a wedding, and I had probably overserved myself at some very clever people's wedding, and I was, the next day I was sitting there, a bit of a head on me, and there was a fellow there with a computer, and we were making small talk, and he said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I had to sleep. I said, dreams, funny dreams. He said, what did you dream about? And I said, I got chased through the forest by a bear, or some really obvious, boring dream. And I said, what about you? And he said, I was dreaming about a machine that would convert carbon back into energy. And I really wished I hadn't told him the dream. And I asked him his name, and he said, my name is Craig Venter. And I worked on the Genome project, and he said the whole world is going to change. And I said, just please don't tell anyone that I had that dream, because I also have interesting dreams. And I was one of those. I would say that, there's something going on in the world where it's not just democracy, it's not just America. Its freedom is, in a way, in the crosshairs. And we have to demonstrate what freedom can do and what democracy can do. And the Global Fund is a kind of referendum to me, the replenishment. This is how are we going to raise the funds? Save 20 million lives. So so far, halved the rates of HIV/AIDS between PEPFAR and the Global Fund in the last 20 years. It's amazing progress. We have to finish it out. We have to show what freedom can do, what democracy can do, and I think tomorrow is kind of a referendum on who we are, and at a time in the world when people are not sure who we are, and so I'm praying for the right outcome on that specific thing, funding for TB, AIDS, and malaria, and I know your research will have huge impact on fighting disease. This man has led the world fighting this pandemic. I came across him years and years ago in Ethiopia, where I began my life as a pain in the arse activist. And I was looking at Tedros backstage, and I said, "Where's all the arrows that's supposed to be in your back?" Because he's taken a lot of incoming, and you look great, and you're amazing, and you, sir, it's just so great to see you there, and your gutsy women around you. So.
Please welcome Randy Weingarten.